Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar From Single to Multi, Transforming Your Home for Vancouver's Future Housing Future. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm Michelle. I'm the Executive Assistant at TQ Construction, and I'm helping from behind the scenes today. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. A recording link will be shared within a week in a follow-up email. Please stay muted throughout the webinar to avoid any disruptions. And we will have our Q&A at the end of this webinar. Feel free to write your questions along in the chat box below at any time, and Henry will answer them at the end. Now I'm happy to introduce to you today's webinar host and TQ's president, Henry.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, big topic. There's lots to go through, especially around the densification that's available to homeowners here in the Lower Mainland. So definitely a lot to get through. So here's us, and it's Michelle and I. So kind of what I want to kind of cover broadly is multiplexes and kind of the opportunities available on single-family lots in BC. We'll cover kind of like the main focus around densification around transit hubs in general, multiplexes, the stock housing plans, some of the considerations when you're designing like a multi-unit property. If you're looking at it from investment, some of the considerations you can make there, considerations around timelines, and then looking at the alternative options, which are in single family homes, whether you're building new or renovating. So to start us off, kind of a bit of a summary around kind of the spirit around kind of densification and multiplexes in the Lower Mainland. There's a few bills passed a year or so ago that kind of allowed the province to kind of basically dictate to cities which areas could be made more dense. So kind of illustrated on this map here is kind of all the major transit hubs, like currently like SkyTrain stations, etc., in the Lower Mainland, and anything within, I think it's 800 meters of this essentially is allowed to have some pretty substantial density. Next to that, the cities also are also required to kind of create zoning opportunities on single family lots to add multiple dwellings, so like a multiplex. So like up to typically 4 independent homes, either in one building or in multiple configurations, on a traditional like single family lot. And so um, with multiplexes, there's a lot of flexibility that's like available in a single family home or in a traditional single family lot that you can kind of convert to create like whether it's a generational home or investment properties, etc. And so the properties that are like candidates for these are basically depending on the municipality, almost every single family lot is zoned for a multi-unit dwelling in some form. Vancouver, Burnaby, Coquitlam, New Westminster, most of the Lower Mainland has adopted policies that support this. The idea behind this regulation is that we don't have enough land here in the Lower Mainland. We're kind of tied between the mountains, the river, the ocean, and the border. And so, if we need to create more homes for people, we have up until these rules were passed, there's no real way to kind of add density to our cities other than through towers. And so the idea is that we are able to create larger buildings that can fit more families onto the existing lots and lands that we have. The idea is that families or investors, someone who's looking to say take their existing home and then break it up into 4 different homes, maybe 8 in some extreme circumstances, and either sell them to market, take them on as rental units, or to house their entire family. It's also worth considering when planning a project like this that the development fees will be different. So if development fees are costs imposed by the city, essentially to build new properties. This is what funds new infrastructure, roads, parks, things like that. But when you add new homes, you typically pay per home. And so when you're adding 4 homes versus 1 to a property, you end up paying a little more. One of the key parts of this initiative that's supported by the province is that they've created stock housing plans that are essentially modular. So you can see in the background of this image, there's a bunch of different floor plans colored different ways. And the idea being that you can then configure what we know are like approved, buildable, like modules of a home that you can kind of stack together and organize either into a single family home, duplex, triplex, fourplex, you name it. And that all of these pieces, if kind of like just bolted together, so to speak, could all essentially streamline your permitting and planning process. And they're all one of my favorite parts about these designs is that they're designed to be either just built on site, like conventionally, like where you're all used to seeing with a handful, like a bunch of carpenters built tipping up walls and building floors on site. However, they're also designed to accommodate like modular construction. So if you were to build the walls and floors offsite, and say, for example, if you live in an area where there aren't as many contractors, aren't as many tradespeople, then you can build the structure offsite, and then deliver it to the property and then assemble it uh, fairly quickly. So there's some design considerations you also need to make in addition to just what you want your house to be. Um, there's some extra requirements around adding density to a property. Naturally, there's you need to understand what the parking requirements are for the property. So, for example, I believe in the city of Burnaby, they require at least one parking spot per dwelling unit. So if you have four homes, you have four parking spots. I believe that's the case. Vancouver has no parking requirements, which may create some challenges on the streets down the line. Uh, and kind of, but you want to make sure that you have an understanding of that. The same thing goes with storage. So, for example, in some cities, they'll have a requirement for dedicated bike storage, with the assumption that we have more commuters living in these units that are kind of biking within the city as opposed to commuting into the valley onto the North Shore much further out. And then there's also you will need to have some type of shared or mutually accessible common space, like whether that's like who gets to use the yards, the kind of the play areas. You need to consider what is the dedicated access to the unit. So like what is the walkway from the street to the front door, or if it's access through the middle of the property, is there a side entrance? Because everyone's got to have their own pathway. One of the other considerations you want to make is how communal do you want the property to feel? And this is something we've discussed with clients, is do you want it to feel like you're all kind of in a small neighborhood together, or do you want to have that sense of privacy where you're more of like separate from all of your neighbors and you don't always see each other? Like this image here is a good example of a little more of a communal feel where you can see that there's a lot of like shared access, shared space. The windows kind of look into each other's properties. Now, if you're looking at doing a multiplex for the sake of investment, then there's a few different ways of approaching it. Um, First off, there's just a traditional like go and get some lending, talk to the bank, talk to a mortgage broker, fund the project. Uh, However, there's depending on what your lot is like and what your financial position is like and what your goals are, there's some different avenues to take. One is if you have a large property and you have more land than you really want to build on, you could then subdivide the lot and then sell a portion of the property to then fund your principal build. Another option is to engage in like a general partnership or limited partnership with a number of investors. So you could then take, say, for example, as the landowner, you say, I'm going to put up the land as my collateral and I'm going to go find some investors who will fund the rest of the project. Folks put their money in, and then the idea is that when properties sell, then depending on the share of the funds you put in, you get profit out. Lastly, which is but what might be, I think, probably for many folks, probably the optimal situation is kind of building a family compound. And this is where a family pools their resources together into a single property because buying homes in a region is quite expensive. And instead of everyone having properties all across the city, instead you essentially merge all your assets, build something that creates essentially a family space, and then you design it around the different generations that will be living on the property, whether that's you have from grandkids to grandparents, or if you include aunts and uncles, Or we've also looked at a project where it was essentially two sisters and both of their families were looking to kind of merge into a single property. So it ended up being three generations across two families. So it was basically, I think it was four or five different independent family units. But the idea being, it allows you to kind of the land basically share the land cost and split that across the family, and then essentially take those savings and put them towards the construction. One of the one of the conversations I often have though is some fear around density. Whether you live in an area that has a SkyTrain station nearby, but all of the neighborhoods are single family, or you're concerned about every every home in your neighborhood getting torn down in a big, large, ugly box being dropped down. Um, I think it's important to keep in mind that this type of construction takes quite a bit of time. And so if you live in an area where I can think of pretty clearly, like there's a portion of Burnaby that is fairly close to a SkyTrain in Coquitlam, just off of I think North Road, um, which is Coquitlam Center, and they and the whole neighborhood is all single family currently, and it's zoned for it to be 11, 14, 20-story towers in that region. However, like if that's not going to happen overnight, the time it takes to acquire the land, permit the project, and then execute it could take from someone committing to doing that to actually having new neighbors in your area could be at least 5 years. Uh, so I think it's important to take a bit of an optimistic view of like what is the immediate impact for us. And so if you're thinking of taking on a project, it's good to look at like what does it take for this neighborhood to be densified when you're evaluating whether or not it makes sense for you or your family to kind of take on something in this area of the scope. And so when you're also looking at multiplexes, the other piece to consider is do you need to? Is a single family like what's the trade-off for doing a single family home versus a multi-unit dwelling? And so one of the things that's always worth considering is like how much floor space is available to you. If you're building a home for yourself and you want the most amount of space for you, a single family home may be the best because you'll get a larger total square footage that's available to you. However, if you're looking to maximize the amount of saleable or total like asset you can have, then a multiplex may be more valuable because you can build more total home um, when you're building to that density. For example, in most municipalities, a single family home maxes out at 60% of your lot size. So if you have a 4,000 square foot lot, you end up with about 3,000 or so square feet of home. Whereas in multiplexes, typically you can go much higher than that. So you may be looking at a total of 4,000 or 5,000 square feet of living space on a 4,000 square foot property. So there's some interesting trade-offs available there. Similar requirements around the new home warranty and the building code and energy efficiency exist for both types of products. So if you're building a new home, you should expect to have um, the builder's insurance and new home warranty program associated, and you should also expect both products to kind of land with under the kind of whatever your municipality's step code building requirements are. If you're not familiar, it's a great topic for another webinar there, but essentially it's the minimum energy performance of the home that's required is what we mean by when we talk about the step code. And then we get to renovations. There's It's kind of like the third rail or third option to consider when you're looking at what to do with your property. In some cases, your existing home is maybe built in a way that cannot be built again. There's situations where we find that a home was built closer to a property line or further closer to the street, for example, that you would not be able to rebuild again today. And so if you're able to retain your existing building and kind of capture some of that grandfathered structure, then you often can find that there's great opportunity to kind of get even more out of your property than might have been previously available. An important thing to note, though, is that there is a noticeable difference between the insurance um, the insurance requirements and the warranties available in a renovation, other rather than in new construction. Because renovations and renovators themselves are not licensed or registered under the BC Housing and the new home warranty program, those warranties are then funded by the builder or the renovator. And so they are often more limited than the typical 2-5-10 that many expect. And naturally, the positive trade-off is because you're working with existing structure, existing foundations, there's a pretty healthy potential for some cost savings. Whether that's reusing your framing, reusing certain finishes, retaining your roof, um, or even some of your flooring or some keeping a portion of the home that you're already in love with, but we need to fix and add on to the other half. So this is another way to think about your project, whether you're going to single family or multi. And it's worth noting that in some cases there are possibilities to do renovations to create a multi-unit dwelling or something similar, but those should be explored on a case-by-case basis, kind of in consultation with your contractor and design professional. And so that is kind of our overall summary of looking at a multiplex project in kind of Metro Vancouver. We covered around kind of which are the hottest areas for densification, kind of around the transit hubs, touched on the different aspects of multiplexes, kind of what makes them a multiplex. We talked about the stock housing plans, some of the considerations, both design and investment to look at, uh, some ways to think about densification in your area, and then some of the alternative options, whether that's building a single family home or renovating a single family home. And so, with all that being said, I'd also like to extend an invitation to you all to join us at the Haven Home Design and Reno Show next Saturday. It is a kind of tabletop event. We'll be doing some seminars. I'm speaking on a panel at 10:30 and moderating another one at 2. Um, and so the tickets are paid, but it all goes to charity to fund the City Reach Care Society. And we also have between March 12th and 15th, the BC Home and Garden Show. Well, we will be there right by the show's front entrance. And if you'd like to have a consultation with us and our team, we can also offer you 2 free tickets to the show as well. And so, if you have any questions, I'd either love to see them in the chat, or if we can talk it through. Michelle, anything up for us?
Yes, we do have one question.
Great.
Can you build a multiplex while keeping an existing structure? And then there's a second question. Is a complete teardown required for a multiplex in Vancouver?
In Vancouver specifically, I believe the case is the answer to most of these is it depends on your property. So, for example, if you were to retain your main building, but then build a, excuse me, a secondary, like a coach house, um, my understanding of the Vancouver bylaw is that you are allowed to create like a second, like a duplex on the back of the property. However, unless there's a tight set of considerations where you can modify the existing building to convert it into a multiplex in Vancouver, uh, some other municipalities are more flexible, where you're able to essentially have a series of independent buildings on the property. I think, for example, in Burnaby, you can have 4 separate homes on a single lot, like 4 independent buildings, but it's all limited by your lot sizes. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it depends. It would take some zoning analysis and some investigation in the property.
Hmm. Thank you for answering that. Jonathan said that. Any other questions from anyone else here? Okay. And just a reminder, yes, this recording link will be shared after this webinar in the next couple of days, probably within a week or so. And you can re-listen to what Henry has described and mentioned. And for sure, yeah, if you have further questions, you can always continue to connect with us, call our office, email us, and yeah, we would love to set up a project consultation or just answer a few questions you may have for your property there. And I think that's it for all the questions for tonight, Henry.
You guys are taking it easy on me. That's great.
So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay. See you in the next one.